Good evening, and welcome to Beer, Booze, and Books, your hopefully more than monthly review of beer, booze, and books. This is our very first episode tonight, and I welcome you, and I hope you enjoy it. To kind of lay down some ground rules, I don't review any story just to make fun of it or to badmouth an author or publisher or anything like that. I don't have the time or the money to do something like that. So basically everything I'm going to be covering is stuff I like. Now that doesn't mean that I'm not going to read something and go, hey, look, it was perfect, it was beautiful. No, I mean, if I come across something in a story, I'll, point it out that, it wasn't something I necessarily liked, but again, I think that's something with any story. But by and large, everything if I'm going to cover it, it's something I like. As far as the beer and booze, of course, drink responsibly. If you're not old enough, don't do it. Also, don't drink and drive. I mean, you should know this by now. Drink responsibly. Basically, we're just going to cover stuff. I'm not a connoisseur by any stretch of the imagination. In fact, this is probably, as you can tell, this is obviously not a highbrow type production. So we'll be discussing things that you can pair with anything off of the McDonald's menu, all the way up to a fancy 5-star restaurant. Maybe, I don't know, but that's kind of where we stand on that. And so I just wanted to make sure that we all kind of were on the same page. Also, when I do the book review itself, it's going to be kind of in two parts. The first part is going to be the spoiler-free. If you've never read the story, I'm just going to kind of give you a quick overview, my thoughts on it, and at that point say, all right, there we go, and then I'll go into the more detailed read of the story or review of the story, and probably be a little bit more in detail about what I think about it, that sort of thing. So I think there you have it. That's the introduction for our very first episode. I really need more of a Rod Serling one, I guess. How would that even work? Submitted tonight for your consideration and edification, we present to you libations for both your mind and your palate. And as you can tell from that very, very poor impersonation, that any dramatic reading we do will not be very dramatic. It's going to be very straightforward. An actor, I'm not really. So, anyway, tonight, basically the format's going to be, we start off with the beer or booze in question, and then we move on to our story. So first tonight, let's start off with the beer. And let me just say this first. I have a tendency to really butcher names, and so if I mess up how something's supposed to be said, please forgive me. Tonight, we are going to be trying a Culto. I think that's how you say it. And again, I apologize for the glare off the camera there. I hope that's kind of... there we go. It comes in, at least where I live, it comes in two levels of strength, 3-point and 6-point. Drink responsibly. And let's try it. It's not bad. Pretty mild flavor. If you don't like a real strong beer aftertaste, this might be one for you. Not real strong. It's got a nice flavor to it. Well, I don't even know how to describe that. It's not bad. Not bad. It's and I apologize, you probably couldn't read the label when I was showing it. This is supposed to be blended with beer aged in tequila barrel staves, or on tequila barrel staves. It says here it's brewed by the Broken Barrel Brewing Company out of Houston, Texas, and Williamsburg, Virginia. I read online supposedly this brand was kind of launched to compete with I guess, beers coming from out of the States. So I don't know. And supposedly there's some sort of, I guess if you go to their website, there's some sort of secret message or something, some kind of marketing campaign ploy thing. I don't know. And their website is occulto.com, I believe. OCULTO.com. Also, I am not a paid endorser or spokesperson for any of this. So, basically, also with like I said, with the books, the stories I cover, also with the drink, you're getting what I like. Pardon me, I can live with that. Goes good with anything on the McDonald's menu, and I guess if you're a little bit wanting something more than that, I think it would work with a lot of things. It's not a real strong flavor, so there you have it. That is the beer review, beer review for this evening. Drink responsibly. So let's move on. Tonight, we are going to be looking at a short story by Dan Abnett, Abnett, I believe is I spell that. Those of you who enjoy DC Comics, Marvel Comics, might recognize him. He is a very well-known author. And I can always mispronounce this. He has a kind of alternate history series out. Trevere, basically the Agent of the Queen. Excuse me. Also, he wrote the novel Embedded, which again is if I recall correctly, was also something of an alternative history novel. And those are kind of his independent works. Of course, as I've mentioned, he's well known in the world of comic books. In fact, the current, if I recall correctly, the current run of Guardians of the Galaxy, the core characters are from him, or were based on what he did, if I understand that correctly. Perhaps more famously, and in fact what we're going to kind of touch on this evening, is his work for Black Library. Black Library is a division, branch of Games Workshop, which is a tabletop gaming company out of England, and they have a rather large science fiction universe called Warhammer 40K. Now, before you go, okay, wait a minute, not interested, I'm taking a pass here on this story you're about to read me. You don't need to know anything about Warhammer 40K to get this story. This story is very self-contained. It's very neat. Now, granted, there are parts in the story that if you do know anything about Warhammer 40K, it is something of a bit of a love letter. You go, oh, I get that reference. Okay. But for anybody else, if you've never read anything about Warhammer 40K, don't need to worry about it. This is a good story. Pardon me. Wow. The beer. Seriously, drink responsibly. Anyway, so this story will work for I think science fiction fans. So let's first start with the book that this comes in. This comes in, I hope I'm saying this right, the Omnibus Eisenhorn. Ooh, no glare on that one is bad. Dan Abnett wrote a trilogy of books based around the character Gregor Eisenhorn. Xenos, Malus, and Heroticus, or Hereticus, however you want to say that. I can barely pronounce it. Additionally with this, so all three of those got combined into this edition. With this edition came two short stories, which was one we're going to cover tonight, Missing in Action. The other one, and I apologize, my brain doesn't work as well as it used to now that I've gotten older. The other short story in it is Backcloth for a Crown Additional. which is also a very good story. I debated actually starting off with that one. Actually, there were a number of short stories I was debating tonight what to start with, but Missing in Action is one we're going to be kicking it off with. Again, you don't need to know anything about this character, background, nothing. You can just pick this story up and just go for it. If you do have the chance to get the omnibus, I would say do it. Those three novels that he wrote, takes you from, if you don't know anything about the Warhammer 40K universe, by the time you get through just the first book, you will know plenty. It's easy to follow. I mean, it's not particularly complicated. It's very black and white, maybe is the way to put it to an extent. So, like I said, you can pick this up. And the short stories, you can just pick up the short stories, read them without needing to know anything. But if you do have the opportunity, get the omnibus. Shoot, thank me. So, let's start off. The opening line to this story, again... Oh, wait. I almost screwed up. Here's the non-spoiler overview of this story. Essentially, our hero, Gregor Eisenhorn, which you very quickly learn, is a agent of the Imperium. And he's on this planet. You don't need to know anything about it. He's just on this world to investigate a crime or something. What happens is right when he gets ready to leave, the security people, police essentially on this planet, approach him and say, hey, we've have this rather horrific series of murders occurring in our city. Excuse me. We think something foul's afoot. Would you, being a member of the Imperium, specifically an Inquisitor of the Imperium, would you please look into this, give us your 2 cents kind of a thing, or, take care of the problem, what have you. At which point our hero, Gregor, he shoots into it, and through a series of events uncovers what's really going on, which I gotta say, you don't necessarily see coming. It's not necessarily a plot twist. In fact, it's really not a plot twist at all. It's that might have been too spoilery. I don't know, but again, I think you should, if without going too much further into it, for my relatively spoiler-free part of this, it's a good story. It's not what you kind of think it is, but once you get there, you realize, oh, that makes sense, kind of a thing. So hopefully I didn't overtly screw that up for anybody. So that concludes our spoiler-free part. Now let's launch into the more detailed, here's what's going on part of the story. Again, the story opens on a planet and nobody cares. In fact, if I'm the opening line to this story of Missing in Action is, I lost my left hand on some meter, and this is how it occurred. That's how the story starts. I like Dan Abnett. He grabs you kind of right away, right out of the gate. He throws something out there that just immediately hooks you, kind of a thing. And I think that's a pretty good hook. So basically, what happens? Our Inquisitor is on this planet to do something. He's reviewing a case, blah, 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 tracking down bad guys. Who cares? What happens is this. Basically, the story starts like that. He mentions what happens is there's an itinerant evangelist who basically is found wandering around, missing, I think it's his hands, his tongue, his eyes. He's been ritually mutilated is what's happened. And apparently, this is like the 4th person in this city that this has happened to. Our Inquisitor's not there for any of this, right? So what happens is the security minister and the primary police person, agent in the Warhammer 40K, they call him Arbitus. Arbitus, I think's the way to put it. Basically, come say, "Hey, Inquisitor, something's going on. We need your help." And I like the way he presents it, because first off, he starts out with describing a little bit of the murder, why brings these people to him, and then it launches into he kind of gives a rundown of the planet, that it's this really dreary, nasty. I mean, you get this real sense of oppression. Not necessarily because of the authorities on the planet, but just this decay that's occurring from the pollution of the manufacturing areas and stuff. So it takes place, this opening bit where he interviews with the head of this Ministry of Security. He's supposed to be in this very opulent, or the most opulent room in this hotel or whatever, and you really get that even that this is supposed to be the best in this city or whatever, it's still a lot of squalor. He writes that very well. I really liked it. But basically, Gregor tells his pilot, "Hey, go, don't worry about this. We're not sticking around. Take off. I'm going to basically be real polite, tell these people I'm not interested, and we'll get on with our lives." Of course, what happens is, with any good story, that's not what happens. The minister comes in and basically hands the data over to Gregor, and he looks at it, and in fact, there's a line in there, something about I took the data slate from him and was scrolling through it, and was preparing to basically politely decline, and he said, as I was reading through it, basically the more I read, the more I realized something was going on. So he's basically stuck on this planet. That gets you into the next section of the story, where they're kind of reviewing the case. They're talking about the other 4 people that have been found. Again, it's written where there's a bit of humanity to him. It's just not this, Joe Blow, got chopped up kind of a thing. I mean, it talks about that these people had lives, that they had jobs, that they were doing things. And it's not real lengthy either. I mean, he hits it. I mean, it's pretty quick, pretty succinct, but it does really convey that these are people, these are human beings that something really horribly bad's happened to. One of the neat features I liked about that section, though, is again, he's hitting the humanity of things, and he talks about one of the corpses that gets found. That one of the workers that finds the body actually was so distraught over it that kills himself. I always thought that was just an interesting little feature that it just kind of shows you that these crimes or these murders aren't happening in a vacuum. And I think one of the things that you sometimes see in fiction is that they present these really horrific crimes, or even just on watching the news and stuff. I mean, there's this almost clinical, this is happening in a vacuum, nobody's really affected kind of a thing. And it turns out that, yes, there is an effect to that, and that it affects people that have, not necessarily anything to do with it. So again, that was my little bit of it, 2 cents on that. So basically the investigation continues, and they go to this, where one of the sites where the bodies were found, and they interview some of the people, and the people are kind of shady, and they're there's just something just not quite clicking, right? So basically they find another crime scene. At this point, you get a little more exposition, if you will. One of the entourage of our Inquisitor is a savant named, I kid you, I'm probably going to mispronounce this, but I kid you not, Uber Amos, or Amos, I think, who is this big, basically contracted a virus, if you will, and this virus compels him to collect information. And he's got an interesting story. They don't quite go into it as much in this short story, obviously, but basically he's correlating all this data, and he starts because basically they're figuring because of the ritual nature of this killing that it's related to cult activity. So he's basically trying to figure out this cult activity or what have you. And basically, one of the things that comes up is that they're, I believe, coming up on the anniversary of a military campaign that had occurred 20 some odd years prior to the start of the story. And our savant is basically telling Gregor that there was a military regiment formed from the population of this planet. They were sent to fight a insanely awful war on this planet that was pretty awful to begin with. I mean, apparently it had two white dwarf suns, and I mean, just literally this absolutely hellish landscape. So that so right there, you kind of see something. The fact that the story kind of takes that lunge away from the idea of this cult killing or something crazy to something a little bit different. Right there you saw, I just kind of stumbled through that. But basically, you see something else is going on there. So from that, the story progresses a little bit further. They decide to go to the murder site, or not the murder site, or basically where the evangelist that starts all this off, that's been mutilated, was found. From there, they are basically nosing around. They start picking up clues. Well, they realize they're being watched, and that gets us really into the pretty much the only action sequence and it's a pretty good action sequence. Basically, people start shooting at the Inquisitor and his crew. They fire back. Eisenhorn chases one of the assailants to the roof, and right as he's getting ready to, he sees the other assailant running, and basically the only thing he can really do is shoot him. And not a problem. He gets his gun out. He's getting ready to do it. All of a sudden, the story has this, and boom. Man, it turns out that the person he was chasing had basically left a booby trap, and our Gregor basically survives it. There was also another assailant that one of his crew chased down, and that individual gets killed. But when looking at the body, they realize that this person has a tattoo, and that tattoo is of the military regiment that was raised to go fight on this other planet. So everything's starting to kind of come together. Basically, they start hauling people in, and they don't go into particularly great detail. They kind of hit the high points, and again, you see a little bit more of the humanity of things, because he talks about when they're pulling in all these survivors from this military regiment, and he said these were they were people that had been crippled, had become drug addicts, alcoholics, basically had couldn't deal with it, and obviously they're in a society that doesn't really provide a lot of support. And then he points out that there were men and women that they were pulling in who were trying to get on with their lives, and this was obviously not helping. But then they realize there's actually several people, and then they, of course, they do realize that a large number of this regiment had already passed away from the disease and cancer from from this hell world they fought on. So basically, they figure out they need to do something. Gregor realizes there's probably one place they go, and at that point, you go into the end of the story, and they basically and the hero's line, and of course, one of the people in the story says, "Well, do you think this is cult activity?" And he goes, "No." He says, "This isn't cult activity. This is these people are still fighting the war." And he kind of goes on to explain that the reason, some of the reason that these victims had been chosen was, there was just something about him that, really was off-putting in some way, something that was just totally benign and innocent, but to this particular group of survivors, there was something much more malign about it. And basically, they go to where he suspects that they've kind of run to ground, and Eisenhorn shows up. They try to reason with him, and that doesn't work out. And in the ensuing aftermath, Eisenhorn is shot and loses his hand, referencing back to the start of the story. And basically he makes a few remarks about how some people never return from a war, if you will. And he puts it a little bit better than I just did, but yeah, that's kind of the that's pretty much it. It's I like this story. I think it's a pretty good story. I think it was had a nice little again, it wasn't a twist, but in fact it kind of, I think, a lot of ways plays on the way most stories work. I mean, you're fairly sure you know who the bad guy is, too, and you're usually right. This kind of changed it a little bit. Took it in a direction I don't think you would necessarily. Again, not necessarily an incredible surprise, but one you're like, oh wow, that's pretty cool. Excuse me. So read this. You get this story. It's pretty good. I think it's something you'll enjoy. So that's pretty much it. We do have a Tumblr page, and I'll try and put that information up. We're working on getting a Twitter feed, but we'll eventually put up. I do have to apologize. I am horrible. I am horrible about any kind of admin type stuff. So I do appreciate comments, and if I don't, I apologize if I don't get around to answering you back or anything. I do apologize. I am horrible about that kind of thing. So pretty much we're going to try and put out, to start with, one episode a month. That's bare minimum. Ideally, that's going to come out. We're going to try and shoot for around the 15th of every month. The goal is to actually be putting 2 episodes together, with the other one coming out either right at the end of the month or the first of the month, give or take. So, again, I'd like to thank you for your time. This is Beer, Booze, and Books. And, if I can, I think next time we meet, we may be looking at Larry Niven's The Soft Weapon, a short story he wrote back in the 60s, I believe. That's the tentative idea at this point. It may change, but that's the idea. So, this time for real. Beer, Booze, and Books. Thank you, and have a good evening.